Welcome everyone to Linden New Art's series of Meet the Artist sessions. Our Meet the Artist series introduces our current exhibiting artists. I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement of country. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we all virtually meet today. I'm joining you from the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And while we meet virtually this morning, today draws on the history of this land and reflects the millennia of experiences of First Nations people coming together to celebrate, to make art, to share stories, and to connect. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to all First Nations people who are joining us today. Before we begin, we're going to play a short video of the Linden Postcard Show. So next we're going to have a chat with Damon Kowarsky, who will be appearing with us soon, along with his artwork. Welcome, Damon. Good to see you.
Thank you, Juliette.
Damon Kowarsky studied printmaking at the Victorian College of the Arts and also the Glasgow School of Art. And since graduating, he's travelled extensively and worked as a scientific, courtroom, and archaeological illustrator. Damon has exhibited across Australia and abroad with solo shows in a lot of cities: Melbourne, Canberra, Wellington, Hong Kong, Karachi, New York, Philadelphia, Cairo, Damascus, and Lahore. And as we know, Damon won the prize for the best work on paper for this work that we can see called In the Gardens. Now, the judges were very impressed by the technical skill demonstrated in this work, but they also found the subject matter very intriguing. And Damon, I was wondering if there is a story behind this image, or would you prefer for it to remain a little bit mysterious?
Well, there is a story, but it's more about how the image was made. So I started creating this during the lockdowns in Melbourne, and I tended to go to life drawing when it was possible every week, and generating a lot of my subject matter through the drawings I made there. But because that wasn't possible, I was looking back through sketchbooks and trying to find images that I could use in work going forward. And I found this image, except it was only half a person. So while the image seemed to work to me, he didn't have any legs. And I was then obliged to find a way to actually make it a coherent image, even though he was only half there. And I also had these drawings of anthurium lilies lying around, and put them together. So it was something that was made because of the strictures of the lockdown, but I was also trying to capture that strange sense of isolation that everyone had during, especially the first lockdown. We really didn't know what was happening, but trying to find a way for that isolation to be a peaceful and calm experience rather than too traumatic. So the presence of the greenery and the person in the garden was supposed to be an isolated image, but a moment of repose.
Mm. It's really successful in this way. And for me, I think it has a sort of almost surreal quality to it as well, which of course I think lockdown did have for many of us. And maybe the kind of composite nature of maybe half the figure that you had with the lilies is part of that sense of there being, two parts to the image. So, and you mentioned as well that you'd been exploring the interactions between the man-made and nature in your work. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the kinds of things that inspire you in that way, and if you see that relating to this image as well.
Well, yes. So a lot of my work started based on architecture, and I'd been traveling in North Africa where the vernacular architecture, at least, is mud, brick and stone. It's a very dry environment. So you've got beautiful kind of iconic cubical geometric buildings in an empty plain or on the edges of cliffs. But I gradually became aware that even though it was ostensibly a very dry environment, there were plants everywhere. People have a basil bush or a tomato plant or something within that urban environment. And I started looking at more Western cities, Melbourne and other places. And what I really noticed was how overwhelmingly green the cities were. Perhaps it's not something that you see at street level. You're out there on the street and it feels dusty and great expanses of tarmac, but you jump up on a rooftop or on a hill and all you see is green, because the canopies of trees take up a huge amount of visual space. So it was about that kind of feeling that nature was actually really heavily embedded in our urban environments. And the other thing that led to that was at the end of 2019, when we had the stupendous bushfires across the whole East Coast. And while Melbourne wasn't directly affected, the sky went brown. We didn't see the sun for 2 weeks. The air was full of the smell of burning. There was ash, deposited on the windscreens of cars in the morning. And I just had this strong, it was an omen of things to come. We didn't know that. But I had this strong sense that the natural world is actually just there. It's not outside. It's a snap and a click, and it's completely overwhelmed everything we've done. So yeah, it was finding that way of making pictures that are talking about that very strange kind of, and as you say, surreal feeling of being in a big modern metropolis and smelling ash, smelling burning, not seeing the sky.
Oh, yes, absolutely. You touched on it a little bit there about, your travels and things you've seen, and you have really traveled extensively with your practice as well. So I was wondering if you could maybe tell us a little bit more about how those travels maybe have influenced your thinking or inspired you in your
Well,
work.
absolutely, because what happens when you travel is you go to a place you don't know, you walk around, you see things, you have a very, very fresh eye. I remember when I first got to Glasgow as a student, and the walk from my apartment to the university took about 3 hours each way. And then by the end of the 3-4 months in Glasgow, it was only actually a 10-minute walk, because in those first weeks, everything was new. Every rock was new. Every intersection, I had to make decisions about whether to turn left or turn right. And by the end of the time, I wasn't seeing that. I just knew how to walk home. I'd seen the shops again and again. But when you first get to a place, you're like, wow, this is something I've never seen before. And I find invariably that when you go to a new place, you see things, you make connections, and actually it informs how you think about the place you came from, but also you're obliged to respond to what you see in ways that I guess are faithful and respectful to that place, and also engage with it really quite closely.
Mm. And whilst you were in Glasgow, is that where you were studying printmaking?
Yeah, so
Or
I studied
yeah.
printmaking at VCA here in Melbourne, and then went to Glasgow for an exchange semester in second year.
And so your practice now, it incorporates printmaking and drawing as well. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about how those different processes, I guess, maybe play into each other within your practice, and how you decide whether to make an illustration of something or a print. And maybe if you could tell us a little bit about also the processes involved in making this work too.
Yeah. Okay, so
Mm.
all the work starts with drawing. I have sketchbooks, I travel, I sit, I draw. There's no photographic references at all. I have quite a strong feeling that the lens is too restrictive, and it's really important for artists to actually go and look at the world. We've got lenses, they're here, they're millions of years old, they work really well, fantastically, and they give a really rich understanding of the world that you're in. A photograph, you go, you take a photograph, you walk away. If you want to make a decent drawing, you're sitting for 2 hours. And as you sit, you have a different feeling. The light changes, you see things, a car drives past, it changes your understanding. So I always start with drawings. I'm trained as a printmaker. I use those drawings to create the prints on
Mm.
copper. It's a very traditional method. It hasn't changed really since the 15th century. But I also then make larger scale drawings, and particularly during COVID, when it wasn't possible to leave my home studio, which is also known as the laundry, I took that as an opportunity to work on large color drawings. And the way it's fed back is, with drawing, you've got this incredibly rich palette of color that you can work with. My printmaking to this point had been much more muted, and the drawing made me inclined to think of ways to actually start bringing richer color in. So this print, for example, I've hand colored
Mm.
all the stamens, the petals, the flower, the lipstick. And that wasn't something I'd done previously, but it was working with color in drawing made me hungry and curious to actually bring that expression of color back into the prints.
I see. So with this work, you would have made it as a black and white print, and then you've hand colored it afterwards.
Correct. Yes.
Wow. Ah, beautiful. I'm so pleased I know how you've made it, because I think a lot of people have been looking at this work and the other two that you have in the show, and actually really wondering how you created it. Um, I'm just looking in to see if we have any questions. If anybody does think of a question. Oh, here we are. Somebody would like to know what kind of paper you use to print on.
Okay, so exclusively BFK Reeve. It's a French paper from Arches. It's 100% cotton paper. It has a soft surface that someone once described as soft as a baby's bottom. It's a beautiful paper, but it's also a very solid paper, so you can do a lot of things to it. There are other papers that give you a very beautiful print, but they're very fragile. And so BFK strikes a nice balance between being receptive to the ink and able to be worked, but also solid enough that it can be handled and shipped and it's durable. So yeah, BFK Reeve, it's a fantastic all-purpose paper.
And with the works in the show, you've mounted them. What's the mount that you've
The
used for?
substrate. So they've
Yeah.
been mounted onto MDF
Uh-huh.
and then sealed with beeswax polish, and I make that beeswax polish myself. So again, that object is sealed and able to be exposed to a domestic environment.
Perfect. Lovely. I'm not seeing any more questions coming in right now, but did wonder what was coming up next for you, Damon.
Okay, so I've just finished a week at Irambu, which is an art space on the northern edge of Sydney, next to the Ku-ring-gai Chase National Park. And on Monday, I head down to Canberra to help hang a survey exhibition at Megalo Print Studio in Canberra. And then in April, I'm back up to Sydney for an exhibition in Katoomba, and then to teach workshops here at Erambu with my partner, Hyunju Kim. So there's a few things happening.
Busy as always. Fantastic. Well, congratulations on your win, and thank you so much for being with us today.